have an altar in my house that one of the things that kind of came with me when I kind of was going towards West African traditions and came back to Christianity was that to honor your ancestors.
Whatever you heard of me ain't worthy to me. I'm just too cutthroat, verbal surgery. How you claim to know that stuff when your shelf's too high? I keep mine's at eye level. What you trying to hide?
Peace, 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 beautiful family. This is Dr. Walter Hidalgo, and this is the Know Thyself podcast. The Know Thyself podcast utilizes the metaphor of the shelf in order to extrapolate the self. And the way we do that is we invite guests to come in and share something about themselves. And before I introduce my guests, I just want to give a few shout outs to some people that I rock with. Shout out to my brother Steve and his 2020 collections. Check out his gear, his merch. Check out my brother Zanuj. I'm rocking some of his jewelry right now. Again, we talk about black-owned businesses. Please support. Let's shift the economic game in the world. Please support. And the website is up and running. To God be the glory. KnowThyself.tv. If you're looking for coaching, if you're looking for workshops for tweens, for adults, check out my book too. Got that for purchase. Beyond the Four Walls: The Rising Ministry and Spirituality of Hip Hop. I gotta remind myself, man, like I gotta pump that book because it's important. It's the message. You feel me?
Yeah.
And as we always do, I would like to shout out a group of individuals. And today I want to give a big shout out to all my ministers, all the people that serve the community, because I got somebody right here that I respect, that I admire, that I'm proud of. She's a singer, a minister. She knows she's a writer, and she loves the color purple. Hey, I got with me right here. I call her the Reverend Dominique Chantell. What's up, Queen?
How you doing? I'm blessed to be here. Thank you. And thank you. I don't have any purple on, but you know.
All good, all in the spirit.
That's right.
All in the spirit, Rev. It's such an honor. Thank you for so much. As we always do, I'd like to start us off contextualizing things. So if we were to jump into Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, go on that historical ride on that elevator. Wow, I just rhymed right now. Right? Take us back to a younger Rev. What would we see? What would we hear? What would we walk into? Because you're originally from?
The Bronx.
BX is in the building. Talk to us about growing up in the Bronx. Give us your resume, if you will.
Sure. So growing up in the Bronx, I grew up in that day, the 80s and 90s in the Bronx. So, the infamous, famous times in the BX.
Totally different.
Yeah, totally different than what it is now. And I've been blessed to live there for, 31 out of 41 of my years. Same exact neighborhood. So I grew up in the Melrose section of the Bronx. South Bronx. My father was a transit cop, and then he left the family when I was 4. So then my mother raised us from then. 3 daughters, family daycare provider, raising us to have a really good education. She valued education. So in the midst of all this poverty and strife that was going on in our family and in our surrounding neighborhood, my mother sent us to independent prep schools, make sure that we were had a really strong education. So my life was spent going between lots of different worlds. So very privileged world, very underserved world. So I just grew up kind of bridging gaps my whole life and moving between cultures my whole life, which comes into play over and over again in the worlds that I've lived in as an adult.
So because this is a special calling, talk to us. Where did you go to school? Where did you get your training, and all that stuff?
So I went to Union Theological Seminary.
Shout out to Union.
Yeah.
Alum.
There's no like symbol for Union. But yeah, so went to Union, studied there from 2003 to 2006, got my MDiv there. From there, I, went to Judson. It started out as just like an internship, but turned into this larger community ministry, public ministry training program. So that was an education. I also went to New York Methodist Hospital and did 3 units of clinical pastoral education, trained to be a chaplain there. So all of those things kind of count as my theological education. Yeah,
and what theology formed you? What's the one that, because I always say that the person, the Walter before Union and after is totally different. You know what I'm saying? So is there something that touched you that really set the tone for your ministry?
I don't know. By the time I got to Union, I was pretty formed. But I think what formed me, not really a theologian so much, but just learning how to disagree with people, learning how to be in a space where there were so many different perspectives, and learning to kind of like not lose who you are while engaging people who you don't agree with. There's a lot of different perspectives in that space, and a lot of sort of like infighting, like theoretical fighting, based on whatever, like how progressive you were, what your perspective on God was, or whatever. And there was a tendency, I think, to be pulled in to believe something different. And I took in what I needed to take in, but I think when you go into seminary, you have to kind of like know who you are, so you're not swayed in one direction or another. So I feel like what formed for me was the ability to be in the space with people that I didn't have the same perspective, and not need them to come over to my perspective, but then not move to their perspective either. Just sort of exist in the same space and like really have true diversity in that way. And so I encountered James Cone in college, actually, for the first time. There was a professor, Professor A.G. Miller, who was a really influential part of my life and formation. And there was a African American religions course there. When we talked about, because I was at a point in my kind of own journey when I was in college where I was kind of leaning towards wanting to go towards like traditional West African religions. I was like in a dance troupe where I was like, ready to go, because I was a little bit tired of like seeing this Jesus that I knew and then having other people tell me about a Jesus that was not loving, was not, caring, was not about forgiveness. So I was like, I love you, Jesus, but your people are driving me crazy. I'm on my way out. And there was something about that class and seeing James Cone's kind of like wrestling, like he wanted to study Niebuhr, but then there was this Black Power revolution happening, and within the Black Power revolution, like, how are you worshiping this white Jesus, and in his wrestling with all of that, kind of came up with a new way of thinking about theology, and like, it was like his wrestling was my wrestling, and I could kind of feel that. So I got to, read him before I actually met him and studied with him, and so his work was very transformative and like affirming for me, as somebody who was kind of wrestling with different sides of things and trying to figure out who Jesus was for me, as a Black person, as a person of African descent. So I think that formation happened more in college than it did in seminary. By the time I got there, I was like, I know what's going on.
I love it. And on that note, rest in peace to Dr. Cone, the founder, the God. Definitely influenced me a lot. I always tell people that my mother introduced me to God, but Dr. Cone reintroduced me to God. Like really, real talk. What advice would you give to a young black woman that's going down your path?
It's not easy.
It's not easy. Man, listen.
Don't let people lie to you and say that like once you accept your call, everything's gonna start working out perfectly. It'll work out, but it won't work out like in a smooth way necessarily. I think it is hard as a black woman, no matter what path you take. I spent a lot of time thinking that if I took a different path, if I took this path and not that path, that somehow I would find space where I would be accepted, all of the different pieces of me would be accepted. And I don't think I've ever found that. I don't think I've ever found like where I'm 100% comfortable as a black woman with my particular story or perspective. I think that on one side you have traditional African American churches or black churches in general throughout the diaspora that don't really believe that women should be on the pulpit, should preach, should speak. They take that sort of traditional standpoint. Then you have on the other end progressive, predominantly white churches, or churches that are white in culture but progressive in theology or perspective, but they are uncomfortable with the fact that you're black. And so
it's really interesting. And you know what? I really encountered that a lot. Shout out to the Riverside Church. I spent a lot of time there speaking of union, you know, and there's a lot of intersectionality that is happening there. To this day, it's a blessing, and in some ways still going through its challenges, that it's still standing, you know, because there was a lot of conflict, there was a lot of misunderstanding. But as is the case when you try to bring people of all different perspectives together, you know, and to unify under one banner, one theology and dogma, I've come to realize it's a very, cumbersome, task to take on. You feel me?
No.
We were community ministers. What's a community minister?
A community minister that's, founded by Reverend Dr. Donna Scotford, this community minister program at Judson Memorial Church. It was set up to be, like I said, when I went there, it was like, she needs an intern, and then it turned into this because Donna is so innovative and thinks big about things. It became a program that, like a training program for public ministry, public-facing ministry. Social justice oriented ministry, which was, perfect for me.
And me.
Considering the path that we both are going on. So it was very formative for me. It introduced me to the UCC, where I eventually was ordained in the United Church of Christ, and kind of allowed me to build my own. The project that I did was actually, I built my own conference on spiritual violence. The ways in which the church has been used to perpetuate racism, sexism, and homophobia. And we said homophobia. If I did it again, I would say transphobia too.
Facts, yes.
So, and so it was a conference, a 3-day long conference. We brought in people to speak on panels, and we had a worship service dedicated to the topic. And that's really the kind of work that we do. We pick whatever it is that was close to our hearts and create a program around that.
I think, it's interesting that we're talking about this, right? Because it was very progressive for me as someone that grew up Catholic, and I understood, Matthew 25 when I was in prison. Did you like that for me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? When I was naked, did you clothe me? And me is you. It's me. It's we. You know what I'm saying? That's the whole thing, right? Where do you see the role of the church today? Because the game has really changed for all of us because of COVID and because of so much stuff is shifting. A lot of what we talk about here is entrepreneurship too, and we were on the phone talking about this. But Rev, how is the church what's its role today? Keep it a buck with me. Where do you see this? Because we've been having so many conversations forever about the evolution of ecclesiology, if you will.
Yeah, you want me to keep it 100? No, I think that COVID presented a challenge to the church that really asked it, are you really ready to survive well into this millennium?
Yeah, initiation, for real, yes.
And it was painful to watch clergy suffer through this and suffer through death after death in their congregation.
Yeah, that's right.
And navigating technology, how to deal with the elders in the congregation. Are people going to still pay their tithes because they're not physically in the building? Things like that. It's difficult, and so I think it was a real challenge. But I really believe Romans 8:28 that in all things God works for the good of those who love God and are called according to God's purpose. So I don't think God created COVID, but in all of this, there's an opportunity for us to learn how to survive into the next age, and how to get our technology together, get our resources together, get contingency plans in place to make sure that we're reaching out to our elders and to our youth, make sure that people know how to give and keep the house of worship alive during all seasons, and also what is the church if there isn't a building? Is that still a thing? Did God call us? Did Jesus call the church to be a building? I don't think so. That challenge was presented to us when we had to be out of our physical spaces. So I think we haven't talked about this yet, but just it was a complicated thing for me to be someone working for the government as clergy while this is happening, and my voice was only being heard as someone who was representing an elected official. But I really wanted to be a pastor, and I really wanted to actually represent Jesus and be it's okay. It's okay because Jesus didn't call us to the building. Jesus called us out to the streets. That's Jesus didn't call us to, be in four walls. Jesus called us to minister to people, and however you can minister to people. It's okay if the building is not available right now. There's still plenty of opportunity to do ministry. So it still is an interesting time.
Coach Walter really takes time and energy with every single session he has with Jackson. Jackson leaves more confident, and he really feels on top of the world. I couldn't ask for a better coach for my kid.
Now that's a workout and a half for you. I think, this is so important because much like everyone else, we've had to kind of really be creative and move with this tide that was really, this tsunami that was coming at us unexpectedly. But as is life, isn't it? Yep. And then we got to bob and weave. As we always do, we invite guests to bring something to share that comes out of their shelf. Rev, what you got for us today?
My grandmother Helen wanted to come today.
May I shout out to Grandma?
I have an altar in my house that one of the things that kind of came with me when I kind of was going towards West African traditions and came back to Christianity was that to honor your ancestors. And so I do keep, the pictures of my ancestors, my in particular the women in my family. So this is my mother's mother, Helen, and I have pictures of her mother and my father who passed away and his lineage, and so they're always with me, no matter where I go. Yeah. I looked at my altar and I was like, which picture wants to go? And my grandma wanted to come.
And grandma's in the building. That's so beautiful, and I think this speaks to so much just because the elders are the backbone of the church, of the community, of everything that we do.
Yeah.
And to bring them with us on this journey, because we're not alone.
No.
We're just not alone. No. And I keep reminding people, especially our young folk, You know, because my role as a community minister was with the youth. That's my calling, and it's all part of the body, right?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Everybody's doing their role. I'm just so proud of you, man. How can people reach out? What do you got going on? I know that you're in a space of transition, and God willing, by the time this comes out, you know, you're rocking somewhere else or just evolving. But how can people reach out to you if they're looking, you know, for your ministry, your service, etc.?
Sure. Yeah. So Purple Reverend is my handle for most things. On Facebook, I have a pretty good group of people on the Purple Reverend page on Facebook, and then my government is Atchison. So on Twitter, my sort of official professional handle is @Reverend Atchison, ATCHISON, which is hard to spell sometimes. And then so I'm working on building. I would love to do something like this. I did one podcast episode for Purple Reverend.
Oh, that's what's up. Yeah. So be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, definitely. So we have that, and then I created something called the Anti-Racist Devotional.
Speak on that.
Yeah, so it's basically a devotional that is live, where people interpret biblical text through an anti-racist lens. And so I had to, when I started working for the mayor's office, I had to kind of give that up. But I'm starting it again, and we're going to do some panels with that. So that'll be coming up next year. Some panels where we have like people using their sacred text from different faith traditions, not just the Christian Bible, talking about how our sacred texts speak to the issue of anti-racism. So just keep an eye out for an anti-racism devotional. And I'm just making that transition, doing my creative work, trying to figure out whatever's next, whatever God has me to do next.
I'm sure God got something, as we say, cooking in the kitchen for you, my sister, because God never stops.
Amen.
Never.
Yeah.
Thank you. So humble, so grateful.
Thank you.
So proud of you.
Yeah, thank you.
And as we always do, we end with a quote. And I think this will speak to you, to us, to everyone, right? It is by my brother from another, Les Brown. I love him because he says you gotta be hungry for this. The quote reads as such: help others achieve their dreams, and you will achieve yours. Peace, family.
Roll up the lot, wood in the raw, feeling relaxed like a day at the